Hey guys, welcome back. I wanted to cover another build today, but this time for the dual blades. With the 2.0 patch, there are a lot more decorations that we can work with that gives us a lot more wiggle room for builds that we really couldn't do prior to this patch. But before getting into the skills, I do want to quickly go over the weapon I'm using for this build, how to get it, what makes this weapon so special in the first place, and then, like I said, we can dive into the builds and the different avenues that we can really take for this weapon. As you probably saw from the footage, the weapon that this build leverages are the Raging Claws. At face value, this weapon looks pretty horrible with negative affinity and green sharpness, but in reality, this weapon has a ton of potential if you do apply the correct skills to it. If you aren't aware of this weapon, Gaijin Hunter did do a fantastic job covering the finer details about it. The link will be in the description below if you're interested. I would highly recommend that you do check it out if you want to know about basically everything about the weapon. I won't be going into as much detail as he does, but I will be going over the basic concepts in order for you to know how to pilot this weapon and know why I chose the skills for the different builds I'm about to show you. One of the reasons why this weapon is so great is because of the Rampage skill. We are going to want to use the Hellion mode as this is what really makes the weapon shine. The skill lets you have 100% affinity during demon mode, however the downside of this is that every time you attack, it consumes double sharpness for every hit that you do during demon mode. So basically, what this allows us to do is completely forget about affinity skills like weakness exploit and critical eye and really focus in on the sharpness management part of this build instead. And speaking of weapon sharpness, the other downside of this weapon at first glance is the sharpness. Natural green sharpness is not that great, and we could lean into bludgeoner theoretically, which isn't entirely bad, but the cool thing about this weapon is that simply adding 1 point to handicraft really changes things. As you can see, 1 point in handicraft elevates the sharpness from green straight to white. So this is where the build really starts to come together, and we can really leverage the different types of weapon sharpness abilities that we have available to us. Alright, so here's the first build. Basically every build needs to at least have 3 skills: handicraft, critical boost, and some sort of sharpness management skill. The build that I'm showing you right now uses protective polish for the sharpness management skill. Critical boost is pretty self-explanatory since it is 100% affinity. There's no reason for us to not use critical boosts here. And handicraft, depending on the build, basically varies from level 1 all the way up to level 5, depending on how much white sharpness you want to lean into. In this specific build, since we are using protective polish, we don't really care to have more slots in handicraft. Just 1 level is fine since protective polish does protect the sharpness, or does preserve the sharpness for 90 seconds. As for the other skills, you can really lean into whatever other skills that you like. I opted for attack boost and paralysis attack since more damage, and the weapon has natural paralysis attack, so it just made sense to do so. I also have a talisman on the right hand side right here that has 2 levels of protective polish already and a level 2 decoration slot. However, this build isn't too dependent on the talisman, thankfully, so as long as you can grab protective polish, critical boost, and handicraft level 1, that's all that really matters. And here's the second build. This build leverages Master's Touch, which is a great skill for a weapon like this since it does have 100% affinity after all. Master's Touch is a straight upgrade when comparing it to something like Razor Sharp, since 80% of the time we're going to be getting free hits. This build is, however, a little more strict on the skills since we don't have protective polish to preserve our sharpness, which means that we really have to rely on handicraft for our white sharpness, right? Which means that we have to make some sacrifices to get those handicraft points. However, I find that sharpness actually does last longer when we max out handicraft versus the 90 seconds you get from protective polish. And you also don't lose time if the monster were to run away and you have to put your weapon away and chase them. Protective polish, the timer still runs during that time. This Master's Touch build doesn't decrement your sharpness as you're running towards a monster. As you can see also with the zoomed in sharpness meter, sharpness doesn't really decrement too much. Master's Touch basically means that 80% of the time we get free hits without any sharpness decrementation. As for the talisman, I'm only using the talisman on the right hand side because it does have a level 3 and a level 2 decoration slot. I don't really care for evade extender. It's just the best talisman I had at the time that has the slots that allow me to work with this build. So these are just two builds that I felt like were viable and fun to play with. Even though these builds probably aren't the most optimal or meta sets out there, it's a lot of fun to play, and the weapons are cat claws after all, so I feel like they pair really well with Almudron's armor set. As for which I prefer playing with, I do really like playing with the Master's Touch variant over the Protective Polish because I find myself having to sharpen less during the hunt when I do use the Master's Touch variant. Granted, there is less attack on it, but I prefer not having to sharpen every 90 seconds during the hunt. It's also harder to know when Protective Polish will wear off during a hunt as opposed to seeing the sharpness meter with the Master's Touch variant. If you guys like this type of content, feel free to let me know. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.